Now let's talk about the space travel that we currently have. And we can't talk about that without mentioning a Mr. Elon Musk. Now, Elon Musk is the world's wealthiest man with somewhere along the lines of $327 billion to his name. But we're not talking about him because he's the richest man in the world. We're talking about him because he is the owner and coordinator of the SpaceX program, which is one of the leading space programs in the world today. Now, one of Elon Musk's favorite books is actually Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So he is living proof that you can turn fiction into reality, which we will talk more about in a moment. But first, let's focus on Musk. So, I mentioned the SpaceX program. What that is Elon Musk has set out a plan for sending people into space, not just astronauts, but people who are able to pay money to go to orbit the Earth or go to the moon, or eventually he wants to go to Mars. So he has a series of different rockets that the SpaceX program has designed. And if you actually go, and I recommend you do, his website, spacex.com, you can view all of the different rockets that they currently have and that they're making. And you can view, for example, he will have these rockets go up into space. If you need a satellite to be dropped off into orbit, you can also look into how much it would cost if you and your family wanted to go and orbit the Earth in space. And you can see his future plans for being able to go to the moon and Mars. Which leads me to the next point of his vision is colonization. He wants to develop habitats. He wants to have livable places on both the moon and Mars. And he is working with a team of scientists to make that dream into a reality. And you can see a lot of that on his website for his future plans for that. So I recommend, like I said, checking it out. But Elon Musk currently is limited by our own restrictions of science on making this dream a reality. We need to be able to get to the moon and Mars in a very timely manner, in a short time. We can't have it take a couple years. So he's currently working on making that a reality. But in our book, it's a little bit different, right? We have the improbability drive on the rocket Heart of Gold. And that improbability drive allows instantaneous, in other words, instant teleporting to, really anywhere in the universe. But the problem with it is that there's no direction. It works off of what we call probability. It's basically whatever is the least likely thing to happen is what happens, and that's where the ship goes. So, in our writing, in our discussion, I want to think about what other kind of ridiculous or silly ways we can think of to travel through space. Because it is the ideas that seem impossible that tend to lead to new scientific discoveries. And that's what I want to talk about next, is why we're reading science fiction to begin with. Now let's talk about... Oh, I have a question. Okay, yes. So, good question. Why aren't we just reading a science book about space? Great. Yeah, why are we not just reading about, for example, Mr. Elon Musk's own journey on creating a space program. And that is because we want to talk about impossible ideas. And we want to talk about how these impossible ideas make things possible. They create possibilities. Because if we're just reading about somebody else's journey, we'll learn how to follow them and their paths, but we won't learn how to make our own new path. So let's talk about that in regards to the history of doing the impossible. We used to think that things like flight was impossible, landing on the moon, heart transplants, moving one heart that is good into the body of somebody who had a bad heart, using the sun as an energy source, solar power, circumnavigation, which is just a big word for being able to circle the globe on either a boat, now an airplane. Back in the day, we used to think that was impossible. And even now, deep sea exploration. The ocean used to be much more of a mystery a long time ago than it was today. And from this, we can learn that just because things seem impossible does not mean that it is impossible. So we need to learn to think about the impossible. And this book does a great job of that. As a matter of fact, this book has inspired many impossibilities. So let's look at how fiction becomes reality. Science fiction often creates ideas and situations that become real, whether it's in a TV show or in a book. So in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, we have space tourism. That's what Elon Musk is working on, being able to tour space, which is what Arthur's doing. We see things like digital payments happening, which at the time, this book written in the late 1960s, would not have been a thing. But now, yeah, you can pay with a smartphone. You have like a chip in your card that you can pay with. You can send money digitally. Also, we have Marvin and the Heart of Gold's own voice programming, artificial intelligence. These were fantasy. These were not real things at the time this was written, but now it seems like, well, yeah, of course. Of course there's AI. Of course there's robots on this ship. Then, of course, we have the Babelfish. The Babelfish, of course, translating everything. Translation apps. So there's no difference between having an AirPod in and it using its microphone to listen to what somebody else is saying, and you're using a translation app to translate it into your ear. This is very easy to do now. But it took the idea of a talking fish to kind of bring that into like, no, I think we can do this. And then, of course, the Hitchhiker's Guide itself is just a tablet. Back then, having this visual screen that you could just, say anything into and it would search. They didn't even have an internet, so just searching the internet for it to give you information instantly seemed ridiculous, really funny, really silly. But now, we do it every day. So these are all things just from this book alone that have moved from fiction to reality. And this teaches us that we need to think outside the box. We need to try to create impossibilities so that they can become real. Scientific breakthroughs, as I have here, require imagination beyond traditional thinking. If you are just recycling data, and by that I mean you are reading a book, you're answering exactly what the book says, you're only copying what that book says. You're not having any new or original ideas. You're just saying, the book said this, the book said this. But we need to think about beyond what we are reading, beyond what other people are telling us, beyond what is possible. Because that will create a blueprint for the future of reality. And then, of course, we can look at ourselves with this. As I have mentioned here, we are like Arthur. We are finding meaning in ourselves by asking, what can we do? What can't we do? Why not? Questioning whether something is impossible is really something very human. Something that we have that makes us, as we talked about, that makes us special and different from other creatures or animals on Earth. And if we constantly challenge what we are meant to do, if we challenge our purpose in the universe, then we are capable of doing more than we thought possible. In other words, we should strive, we should reach for the impossible so that we can make new things possible. So something to think about. And with that, let's keep going. Speaking of finding meaning through questioning the impossible, let's look at finding meaning in questioning the universe. So in our book, we have a supercomputer, the most advanced computer ever made, called Deep Thought. And Deep Thought is tasked with finding the answer to life, the answer to the meaning of the universe. And so it takes millions of years to think about it. And it says, I've finally come up with the answer to life and everything and the universe is 42. And so what does that mean? Well, in truth, it's meaningless by itself. But what Deep Thought says is that we need to ask the right question. Asking for the answer without knowing the question is impossible to understand. We need both together to make sense of it. So, really what Deep Thought is saying is that we must ask the right questions in life before we can find answers. We need to figure out what's important, and we need to question what's important to find that value. Because the number 42 has infinite possibilities, right? It could be a math problem. What's 40 plus 2? The story sometimes jokes about that it could be how many roads must a man walk? In other words, how many paths must we try to take to find ourselves? Oh, well, 42 paths is how many we need to try before we can find ourselves. But like most things in this book, it tries to be a little silly. It tries to tease this very fun idea out of something serious. And so it, in fact, can be fun to work backwards from a problem. If you've taken any math classes, sometimes they will give you the answer, and you need to find what is X, what is the missing part of the question. And the book gives us that, the answer, but without the question. And so a new computer is made. And that new computer ends up being the entire Earth, meaning that humans and people are living our lives as a system for trying to find the question, the meaning of life. Now, the mice take it literally in trying to say that we are trying to find the question to why the answer is 42. But really what we're looking at is, what is the meaning of life? Because life is not math. So the meaning of life cannot have a simple answer. It cannot be something like 42. The meaning of life cannot just be one thing, just this. It's not a simple question. So it won't have a simple answer. So we need to, according to the book, according to deep thought, we need to really think about what are questions that can lead us towards a meaningful life. What questions can we ask ourselves that lead us to what is the meaning of life? We can't just ask, what is the meaning of life? We need to ask ourselves questions like, how can I live a good life? How can I enjoy life? How can I make sure that there is less pain and misery for myself and other people in life? The book tries to teach us that the value is in questioning life itself. And it does this in a ridiculous, a silly, or I like to call it absurd way, by saying, oh, well, the answer is 42, because we shouldn't take life too seriously. We should have fun. It creates the difference of being Arthur, who is, of course, worried all the time about life, but the second he is able to start moving with the universe and not laying in the mud in front of his house, and he's out traveling and searching for himself and the answer to life, he starts leading a better life. But then we also see the other character of Marvin. Marvin is a great example of not looking for the questions, not looking for what's important or valuable, and just being so inwardly focused on what is going wrong and our own worry that we are just absolutely miserable. And we see that other people around Marvin aren't happy being around him because he's sort of radiating, he's emitting these like waves of misery and sadness. So think about the questions we can ask ourselves that are important, the questions that every human can ask themselves. You should also think about what are some fun ways to answer, or not answer, but to have questions for what leads to 42. Why could deep thought possibly have said 42 is the answer? Is this how many possessions we must own in our life to be happy? Any more than 42 and we'll be unhappy. We won't have a good life, a meaning life. It's fun to think about that. But everyone, that is all the time I have today for Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I hope you've enjoyed this discussion, and I hope it leads to some very interesting discussions and thoughts. So with that, everybody, thank you and goodbye. Until next time.